while we're in the Tiger 2, can we just talk about the mouse?
Yes.
You talked a little bit about how well the mouse...
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, the original idea of the heavy breakthrough tank was motivated by the politicians. The army weren't looking for these vehicles. They wanted more of the Panzer IVs, more of the Panthers. But the politicians thought this would be a prestige project to have the big tank. So we had the mouse tank was one, which was obviously a huge drain on resources. Not a bad vehicle actually in performance and so forth, just a huge consumption of energy and materials and so forth. And it was the only tank program that was ever stopped dead by bombing, because there was the components to build 128 of those in position when the factories were bombed and the production was cancelled as a result of that.
Talk a little bit about the technical effectiveness of the mouse with the
yeah, well, this is a Porsche design, and it has a number of unique features in it. The transmission is again electric. So you had a petrol engine driving a generator which drove the petrol or the electric engines. So the combination of those was actually very good. And there's this famous example where during testing in Böblingen, one of the mouse prototypes strayed into an area that was forbidden for tanks and sank in a bog right up to the top of the hull, and to get that out, basically all that needed to be done was for a group of soldiers to come in and dig all the mud away from around the vehicle, and then by applying the torque of the electric engines in a very slow fashion, it hauled itself out of the mud. There's no other vehicle would have done that. But the problem the Germans had was electric drives use lots and lots of copper, and they didn't have copper, and they didn't have enough copper, so they didn't want to waste the copper supplies they had on making thousands of tanks with electric engines. But as a method of driving the vehicle, it's actually very good. And as we see now, electric things are coming back at a hell of a pace.
So what are some of the, because I know that you've written extensively on this vehicle and then on the surrounding projects, what are some of the best books that you recommend of yours so that people could learn a little bit more about it?
Well, in the Panzertrack series, we did one single book on the just on the mouse, and very fortunately a friend of mine in Germany had rescued a huge consignment of the drawings for the mouse project. So for the book, well, obviously one had measurements and so forth coming out of the example in Kubinka, but that was only a test vehicle. What we had was the drawings with the markings on them showing that this is the hatch type to be used in vehicle number 6 and from then on, and this is the gun sight for vehicle number 12. And it showed the progress of modifications that were planned in the vehicle, and all of the components are accurate. So the drawings in that now are spot on. They're exactly as it would have been. But as I said, the Krupp factory got bombed by the Allies and was basically put out of business. And then by that stage they were beginning to say this project's a complete waste of time. Now again, they weren't going to waste things because they looked at the number of turrets that were already completed, and they had a plan to complete those turrets and mount them on bunkers. So they were going to build concrete bunkers with mouse turrets on them.
Wow.
For the ones that already existed. But the project just died, and probably just as well, because it was consuming a lot of resources.
So another thing that you see around and that I've seen in your drawings are the E-series tanks.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, the E-series was an experimental series of designs. Entwicklung is what E is standing for. That's just project development. So they were exploring things that they might do in a new series of tanks, but they hadn't ordered this new series of tanks. So the E-series, again, they had a range of them running from E10, I think they even had an E5, E10, E20, and so on up to explore them. They were looking at things like different engine combinations. They were looking at making a power pack that you would mount at the rear of the vehicle that you could dismount. They were looking at different types of suspension. For example, the E-10 was designed as a Jagdpanzer, and it had the most novel of suspensions in that it could sit down on the ground, drop its suspension onto the ground, and be only 1.2 meters high on the ground. But these were all nice theories that they were examining. You had ones based on the size of vehicle of a Panther, but really nothing to do with it. And they were looking at materials substitution, and generally doing what you should be doing is exploring what you're going to be doing in 2, 3, 4 years' time. They were not projects that were coming online. The E-100 is a what would you call it, a camouflage term, because you had the mouse, but alongside the mouse you had there was a very heavy version of the King Tiger, and that was I've forgotten what the name was going to be, but it was something Tiger at any rate. But this was then changed. The designation was changed to E-100. But that was just to make it sound like a new vehicle. In fact, it was the Super Tiger that had been in design in competition with the mouse, and it was coming not from the Porsche design team, it was coming from the design team at Krupp. And it just got bigger and bigger and bigger, and they eventually put the design of the Porsche mouse turret on top of it, as on paper. It never got to that stage, but again it was retained as an experimental to see what would happen if we had this type of suspension, and these types of the ideas of having these dismountable side armor pieces. The suspension was Bellevue washer suspension, so it was these conical washers that compressed, so a completely new type of suspension for the Germans, but they were looking for ways of getting the suspension off and out of the hull rather than with the torsion bars. And they were also nervous about, the making of torsion bars as a specialist, and if the factories got damaged by bombing, what could we do? Is there cheaper suspensions that would do the job? So the more practical projects, but nothing ever came of them, were designs for the Panther with leaf springs. In substitution for the torsion bars. But again, these were just ideas that they were working on, not real vehicles.
Thank you all for watching. I really enjoyed being able to just sit and listen to Mr. Doyle talk tank, and I hope you guys learned something too. I have to apologize for the poor audio quality during this series out at Fort Benning. I had some equipment limitations that I wasn't actually aware of until I was able to be home and reviewing the footage after the trip. I don't travel with the PC, so I have the equipment upgrades in the meantime since then. It was filmed back in February, so I hope you've learned something from the series of videos along the way. Drop a subscription and let me know in the comments what German armor you'd like to hear from Mr. Doyle next. I'm very thankful for his time and for the access from Fort Benning to be able to record with these rare vehicles, and I hope you were able to enjoy it as much as I have. See you next time!